Picture this. You've got an empty wall, maybe some underutilized space, and you are just dreaming of transforming it into beautiful, floor-to-ceiling built-ins. You know the look, high-end, custom, a massive storage upgrade, the absolute perfect display for your books and collectibles. But, without handing over thousands of dollars to a custom carpenter. Well, welcome to this explainer. Today we're breaking down exactly how to make that dream a reality entirely on your own.
Okay, let's dive right into our roadmap for this project. We're going to cover choosing your path, installing the base, stacking the shelves, the magic of trim, painting and finishing, and finally, the final cost. We are going to take the intimidation factor completely out of this whole process.
Starting with Section 1, choosing your path, IKEA, stock cabinets, or scratch-built. To kick things off, we really have to address the central dilemma for any beginner DIYer out there. What foundation are you going to use for these built-ins? You essentially have three distinct paths, and honestly, your choice right here is going to dictate the rest of the project.
Let's break down the three core routes from our sources, looking at the real-world trade-offs between convenience, customization, and durability. First up, the famous IKEA Billy bookcase hack. It's fantastic if you don't own any power tools, but it does come with some pretty serious structural limitations. Then, in the middle, you've got cheap stock kitchen cabinets from a big box store like Lowe's. This gives you a really sturdy base, really fast, though you might have to chop them down a bit to fit your specific needs.
Now, when we compare the materials themselves, the contrast is honestly kind of shocking. IKEA's MDF is, notorious for sagging over time under the weight of heavy books. Plus, if it gets even a little bit wet, it bubbles and warps like crazy. On the flip side, 3/4-inch birch plywood is structurally superior. It holds weight effortlessly, handles moisture a million times better, and this is absolutely crucial for a built-in project. It takes paint beautifully.
But hey, if you do opt for the IKEA route to save some time up front, just be ready for a few specific headaches. For starters, you're going to hit that folded cardboard back that leaves a very visible crease. It's basically a dead giveaway that you're working with flat-pack furniture. Also, that factory finish, it actively repels standard paint. And maybe the most frustrating part of all is that the shelf fronts are not actually flush with the sides. So, if you try to add a face frame to make it look truly built in, you end up having to rip down these tiny 1/8-inch filler strips just to bridge the gap. That creates a double seam, and to hide that seam, you're stuck using stinky, hard-to-sand Bondo. Not fun.
Moving right along to Section 2, installing the base, setting the foundation. Now that we've talked materials, let's look at how to actually secure those bottom cabinets, because a solid foundation is literally everything.
Whether you're using affordable stock oak cabinets or building your own plywood boxes from scratch, you've got to make sure they sit completely flat on the subfloor. Seriously, do not just plop them down on top of your carpet. You actually need to cut the carpet away and move the tack strips back so your cabinets rest directly on the wood subfloor. Another quick tip, if you're using stock kitchen cabinets to create a desk area, they usually sit at 34.5 inches tall. You'll probably want to chop off that top drawer section to bring it down to a much more comfortable 30-inch desk height.
And you know what? Even experienced builders make mistakes. One of our sources perfectly captured a classic DIY oversight, saying, "I didn't even notice this outlet when I was measuring the space, and it fell right where my bench divider was, so I notched this out." Always double-check your wall layout for hidden electrical outlets or air vents before you permanently drive screws into those wall studs. You might need to notch out the back of your cabinets to make sure those outlets stay perfectly accessible.
Okay, Section 3, stacking the shelves, building upward. If you're feeling intimidated by the sheer scale of a project like this, just remember this one little secret. Built-ins are essentially just big plywood boxes with dividers inside. That's the whole thing.
The big trick here is maximizing your materials. If you're building those upper boxes from scratch, 15 inches is sort of the magic depth. Why? Because it lets you yield exactly 3 perfect pieces from a single 48-inch wide sheet of plywood. You're wasting almost nothing. Plus, stepping the upper shelves back to 15 inches leaves you with plenty of functional, usable desktop space on the base cabinets right below.
Now, while you're actually assembling these big boxes, you've got to be super careful about something called racking. This happens when your beautifully cut bookcase tilts side to side and falls completely out of square. If you go ahead and nail the back panel on while it's racked, well, your bookcase is permanently crooked. A great save for this is to attach a temporary diagonal scrap piece of wood across the front face during assembly. That locks everything perfectly square and saves you from the nightmare of having to tear apart a ruined shelf later on.
Which brings us to Section 4, the magic of trim, hiding the flaws. Once your boxes are stacked and secured to the wall, it's time for arguably the absolute best part of the build, This is the magical phase that transforms raw, kind of ugly wooden boxes into high-end custom furniture.
This secret weapon we're talking about here is the face frame. By taking simple strips of 3/4-inch poplar or pine, like your basic 1x3s or 1x4s, and attaching them to the front of your boxes with wood glue and some pin nails, you completely hide those raw layered plywood edges. And it does double duty. Not only does it bridge the gaps between your separate boxes, tying them into one massive cohesive unit, but it also adds a ton of structural stability to the front of the shelves so they absolutely will not sag.
Here's a brilliant little pro tip for dealing with your house's quirks. Because let's face it, almost no walls are perfectly square. If you push a perfectly square cabinet into a corner, you are going to see a gap. The trick is to overhang the side of your face frame by about 1/2 inch. That extra bit of wood acts as a custom filler strip. Then you can just trim that overhang slightly with a saw so it perfectly matches the wavy, imperfect contour of your drywall. Boom, a snug, seamless fit.
All right, Section 5, Painting and Finishing, the final polish. You've built it, you've got it beautifully trimmed out, and now you want it to look like it rolled right out of a high-end factory. Getting that professional look comes down entirely to your patience during this finishing phase.
To get that flawless aesthetic, there are 5 meticulous steps you really can't skip. First, you've got to fill every single seam and nail hole with wood putty or Bondo. Second, sand it all completely smooth. Third, run a nice bead of caulk around all your trim and crown molding details so it visually blends right into the wall. Fourth, you have to prime. And please listen closely to this one. If you used IKEA furniture, you absolutely must use a shellac-based primer, otherwise your top coat is just going to peel right off that slick surface. And finally, step 5, apply a really high-quality paint.
The creators in our sources relied on premium products to make sure their finish lasted. We're talking paints like Sherwin-Williams Infinity in West Highland White, or this really gorgeous green shade they used called Basil, which they offset beautifully with Minwax Early American stain on the countertops. But honestly, the real game changer is the application method. Investing in a tool like the Graco True Coat paint sprayer, instead of just grabbing a brush or a roller, is hands down the best way to get that buttery smooth, factory-level finish without any clumps, sputters, or visible brush strokes left behind.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, the final cost, myth-busting the budget. Let's tackle a really common assumption right now that DIYing something from scratch using raw lumber is automatically going to be way more expensive than just buying pre-made flat-pack furniture.
The numbers here might actually shock you a bit. If you buy a large IKEA Billy bookcase with the necessary extenders to reach a tall ceiling, you're looking at spending about $172. But if you build that exact same sized bookcase from scratch using heavy-duty birch plywood and strong pocket hole joinery, it actually costs around $152. That's right, it is $20 less per unit to build it yourself, and you walk away with a vastly superior, far stronger product.
And let's scale this up to a massive room transformation. For a full 12-foot span that features a custom desk area, stock base cabinets, and ceiling-height scratch-built upper shelves, the total cost comes in right around a highly accessible $1,000. To put that in perspective, if you hired a custom cabinet maker for a 12-foot built-in wall, you'd easily be looking at writing a check for 5 to 10 times that amount.
Sure, a project like this definitely takes some patience. And yeah, you might have to learn how to use a few new tools. But keep reminding yourself, these projects are essentially just big wooden boxes with dividers. That's the whole shebang. So now that you've seen the roadmap, you know the hidden pitfalls of flat-pack furniture, and you've seen the absolute transforming power of custom trim. The only question left for this explainer is, which foundation are you going to choose to start building your dream space?